on the record. Hi there. My name is Avil Beckford, and this is the latest episode of the One Problem podcast. We all know there are lots of problems in the world, but we're just going to focus on one. Okay? We don't want you to get overwhelmed. The guests come on, and it's all a way for us to learn from each other. Now, today, my very special guest is Donna Knutson of Right Journeys. I met her on Lunch Club, and I decided to have her on the podcast. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you, Avil. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about the one problem, and that's telling your story, overcoming obstacles. So I'm a book editor and a writing coach. Basically, I help people tell their stories. And one main problem that a lot of people run into is this fear and overwhelm. People come up to them all the time and they tell them they have this great story and they should tell their story, or they know that they have a story worth telling, but they're not sure how to get started and they're not sure what steps to take, and it's just overwhelming, and so they're frozen and they don't take a step. And yet even other people that I've run into and worked with have a story they want to tell for their kids, or a story they want to leave for their family, like as a legacy. And again, they just look at like all the books out there and they can't see how they can get from their idea to a published book. So I'm going to give you like 5 steps. There are 5 steps that I use when I help my authors get themselves ready and move through that fear to actually writing. And you're a writer, Avil, so you know that even the most seasoned writers can run into trouble and can get stuck. So the first tip that I would say would be to collect information on the process of writing, because it's a process. If you were going to go from sitting on your chair to running a marathon, you would probably collect some information on the shoes to wear and how much training you need to do. Well, you should look at writing the same way, even though it's something that we're taught when we're young. If you're going to sit down and you really want to write a piece, collect some information on different tips and things that can help you. There are things called writing prompts. There are exercises that you can do to get yourself, to get that muscle of writing and having those words come to you smoothed out. So that would be the first thing, information. The second thing I would say would be organization. So that is the one that hurts a lot of people. They start writing and then they start writing something else. And they start writing something else. And they feel like all this time has gone by, but they're not really sure where they are. If you were going to go on a trip from where you live to the other side of the country, you would not just start and go. You would probably get a map or GPS or decide where you were going to stop along the way. Some of those things would be part of your plan. And if you're going to write something, a plan is a nice thing to have. So you want to decide what the main key elements are of the story that you're telling, and kind of in what order you want to reveal those. And if you have those main points along the way, then after that, it's a journey. But if you have some sort of blueprint or a map, it really helps you get from point A to point B without taking these weird detours that might be confusing to a reader. Direction. So that has a lot to do with what we just talked about as well. Direction and creating that framework to keep your story together. You want to really make sure that if you have a framework like that, it's not the be all and end all, right? So if you are, some people, you've read stories or gone to movies where they're starting here and then they kind of go on a little journey, but they get here, and then they go on a little journey, but they get here. And it's a nice little meandering journey. I've been to other movies or read other books where they go straight from the beginning to the end. And it's like a race and the pace is really fast. Neither of those is right or wrong, but you will get to decide when you're writing which one works best for you. Feedback. That's my fourth tip. So we're writing, we know exactly what we want to say. So when we write that sentence, we are clear about what we're saying. But the people who are reading, they're going to come to that information with their own life experience. And that will color how they understand what you're writing. So it helps to get feedback from people to see if what you meant to say is being taken in the context in which you meant to say it. Sometimes you might need to add more information. Sometimes you might need to take some away. My example for that is when I was teaching, I used to work with high school students. And when I started, I could talk about the space shuttle explosion. By the time I finished, I had to figure out which space shuttle explosion I was talking about. And then the last group, there was no space shuttle. So it really, each group needed a different amount of information to understand what the event was in context based on their life experience. And finally, the last one would be accountability. Now, accountability is actually a really good thing. And we need accountability because life happens. So when I say accountability, I think of accountability and cheerleading as together. So we're not talking like accountability. Do it again, do it harder, do it another day. That's not what we're talking about. Accountability in this case is you get to check in with somebody. They get to say, you did great. That was fabulous if you had a great week. And if you had a week that was off, because life happens, then that person helps you say, all right, well, what are you going to do next week to get back on track? And how can we do that? So accountability and cheerleading helps you not stop and never get back to starting again. And those are kind of my 5 tips for how to overcome that one problem when you want to tell your story and overcome those obstacles.
That's interesting because as I listen to you, some of those steps apply to many different kinds of projects. When you're starting a project, at least when I start a project, my starting point is gathering information, especially if it's a topic I'm not that familiar with, because I need to understand the lay of the land, that you pointed out. So even though you're talking about writing a book, it's applicable to other areas. So thank you so much, Donna. I'm sure that my listeners and viewers will learn quite a bit from you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And, I help people all the time. So I just encourage people to reach out and give me a call or send me an email and set something up. And I love to help people tell their story. It's so important for us to communicate with one another as human beings. It's how we connect and understand one another. And so I want to help that process.